Many years ago, Kim made reservations at a Moroccan restaurant. Anybody been to a restaurant like that? It's like cushions, pillows you sit on. And she invited some friends, and we had a great time. The interesting thing happened, however, was that somebody that I didn't recognize this guy, and he's sitting with us for quite some time. And he had a card, and it said Adam on there. And I just assumed that he came with someone else. Well, everyone actually assumed the same thing. About an hour later, after talking with him at our table, he gets up, he talks to the hostess, and then all of a sudden he disappears. And we actually discovered that there were actually 2 birthday parties, okay, pretty funny, that night, both under the names Adam and Kim. And he had accidentally joined the wrong party and sat with us for an hour before realizing he was at the wrong party. But we found him later on, and we had a good laugh. He was present, but he didn't belong. And I share that because I think as Christians, we may have a similar experience when it comes to church, and that's what we're talking about this morning. People sit through the service, maybe they know some of the songs, but they've never really stopped to ask, am I at the right gathering, right? And what's going on here with church? What's it all about? And so we're beginning this new series called Rhythms of Faith, where we're going to be exploring these basic, essential practices of the church. We spoke about worship last week. What is worship? And this week, we're going to be focusing on another simple question. What is the church, and why do we gather? Would you agree with me that's a pretty important question? Okay, so when we hear the word church, what comes to mind? Maybe a building, denomination, a worship service. In fact, when somebody finds out that you're a Christian, what's probably one of the first things that they ask you? Exactly, what church do you go to? And we all know what they mean. They're asking, where we gather. What congregation are you connected to? Well, if you look up the word church in a dictionary, You'll typically find 2 definitions here. One is a building used for Christian worship, okay, the building, or it refers to an official Christian religious organization. These seem to be the primary definitions that pop up. And these definitions aren't wrong. This is how we use the word church in English. However, our English word church is not derived from the Greek word that is translated church in the New Testament. So where does this word church even come from? What's the origin, the etymology? Well, it comes from, if you go back far enough, you arrive at a Greek word, kyriakon, which means the Lord's house. So it's kind of a short way of referring to the Lord's house. And from this Greek word, we get church in English, kirk, yeah, Scottish, right? And German, who can pronounce that? Is it Kirche? And all this is helpful background just to know, okay, where this word comes from, but it also raises an important question. When the early church spoke about church, what word did they actually use? So, first thing to note is that biblical church is not a building. Church is the people. Say it with me. Church is the people. And I'm sure many of you already know this, but I think it's a good reminder. So let's look at a few examples in the New Testament. So we can see, like in Romans here, Paul says, greet also the church in their house. Okay, 1 Corinthians, Aquila and Prisca together with the church in their house, send you party greetings in the Lord. Colossians, give my greetings, okay, to the church in her house, Nympha. And then in Philemon, we see Apphia, our sister, and Archippus, our fellow soldier, and the church in your house. You might see in your translation it'll say the church that meets in their house, because that is clearly the idea. Okay, so in other words, Paul does not confuse church with the building. The house is the place, the church is the people. All right, so what word is being used here in the New Testament? Let's talk about this because it's really important. The biblical word that is translated church is ekklesia. Everybody say ekklesia. There's a book of the Bible that's related to this word. Can anybody guess it? Very good, Ecclesiastes. In Hebrew, it's Kohelet. It's a related word, the one who speaks before the assembly. So ekklesia is this Greek word, and it means assembly, gathering, or congregation, whatever word you prefer. That's what it means. Is that simple? In English, we get the word church. So when we open our English Bible and it says ekklesia, it appears as church, which is a completely different derivative altogether. It comes from a different Greek word. How many Spanish speakers here? What is church in Spanish? Yeah, we can see that it directly comes from the Latin ekklesia, which comes from ekklesia, Greek, okay? So honestly, I think that they got the better deal, right? Much more closer. We can see that connection is still there. However, that connection is not so strong when it comes to English. Okay, so in the New Testament, this word first appears in the teaching of Jesus. When he asks his disciples about his identity, Peter responds, and Peter says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And then Jesus responds to Peter, and he says, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." And then he says, "I tell you, you are Peter, and upon this rock," again, there's a little bit of a wordplay here. He says, "You are Petros, on this Petra, I will build my ekklesia." That's what he says. So you're a stone, and upon this bedrock, that he is the Messiah, I will build my ekklesia. And the gates of Hades, a better way to understand this would be the power of death, you could say, shall not prevail against it. So that's the first occurrence where we see ekklesia in the New Testament. And Jesus also uses this word in Matthew 18 when he's giving us instruction about how to resolve conflict in the body. And he mentions ekklesia in the context of community. Now, why is this important? Why do I mention this? Why not just quote something from the book of Acts? Because people often point out, especially today, I think people are starting to understand this more, Jesus did not come to invent a new religion. And this is 100% true. Jesus was not starting a brand new religion detached from the people and the story of Israel. That is not the right way to understand Jesus, even though many have read him that way. That is not correct. However, people often fall into the trap where they assume that therefore Paul invented the church. Anybody heard that idea before? See that online? And that's simply not true. Before Paul even spoke about the church, the ekklesia, Jesus spoke about his gathering, his ekklesia. So when the New Testament uses the word ekklesia, what kind of assembly is being referred to here? And I want to address two common misunderstandings this morning. Many of us have probably heard that ekklesia means called out ones. And this idea comes from breaking the word into parts. So ek can mean out, and klesia, kleo in Greek, can mean to call, and so called out ones. So people will assume that it has something to do with sanctification, right? Holiness, God calling out a people for his own. It makes a fantastic sermon. The only problem is it's not correct. The theology is correct, but that's just not how the word was used at this time. And a typical mistake that people make when it comes to biblical languages is that they rely heavily on etymology. They break a word apart to determine the meaning. That's not how you figure out what a word means in language. Usage determines what a word means in language, okay? Let me give you, there are many examples I could provide in English, but take the word understand. Let's apply the same methodology. Understand. Okay, so when you stand under something, you understand. It makes perfect sense, right? We have to avoid the temptation to read the biblical languages the same way. Okay. Second claim, and this one I think is quite interesting here. It's less common in most churches. However, it's become more popular in conservative circles. And I've seen this online a lot lately. And I'm going to show you a clip in a minute of Charlie Kirk actually talking about this and explaining this. And Charlie Kirk, I have a lot of respect for Charlie Kirk. I'm conservative, so this is no critique of Charlie Kirk. But I want you to hear it so that you can actually hear the idea, okay? This idea is that ekklesia really means public square. It's that the idea that Jesus took a secular Greek political term and used it for his followers. That means the church essentially functions like a civic assembly where political and community matters are discussed. So let's just watch this quick clip from Charlie Kirk so you can hear.
When you step into that public square, the Ekklesia is a biblical word where if I said, Jesus said to his disciples, on this rock build my, and we say church, right? The word is Ekklesia. What is an Ekklesia? An Ekklesia was a Greek word for a political gathering where they unified around two other Greek words, eleutheria and isonomia, freedom and equality. So Jesus used the word, on this rock build my public square engagement center. On this rock build my go forth in every sector. This idea of compartmentalized Christianity has got to stop.
There's a lot to unpack here. I agree with his overall take that we should have this compartmentalized understanding of our faith. How we vote should be connected to what we believe. But we have to address this because there are many matters that we as Christians and from the pulpit, we should not be afraid to address and discuss. Even matters that are controversial, would you agree? But it is an overcorrection to make politics the center of our gathering. Just to provide the evidence here, Ekklesia is a neutral term, and it just means assembly. Here are 3 ways, for example, that it's used in the book of Acts. There's an assembly of Jewish believers in Jerusalem, an assembly of idol craftsmen in Ephesus. They get angry with Paul, right? Because he's preaching against idolatry. And so all of the idol makers, they all get together. They have this assembly, right? And they're trying to, they cause a lot of commotion. Again, the same word, ekklesia. And then we have the assembly, this is an important one, the assembly, ekklesia, of Israel at Mount Sinai. Did you know that that word is used there? Acts 7, verse 38 talks about the ekklesia, the gathering of Israel. This is really important because before Jesus was born, before all the disciples were, the Hebrew Bible, or Old Testament, was already translated into Greek. It was known as the Septuagint. There are a lot of different translations. And they rendered, when it talks about the assembly of Israel, they rendered it ekklesia. So it was already being used in reference to the assembly of Israel. God has always had a gathering of his people. So clearly, this does not refer to simply a Christian gathering, and it doesn't refer to a political gathering, although it could refer to that in Greek, but it's determined by context. We wouldn't say in English, when we come to like Acts 19, we don't say a church of idol craftsmen gathered in Ephesus, right? We don't render it that way. But if you tried to take the word church and we just translated it assembly, people wouldn't be too happy. They probably wouldn't buy that version, that translation. You see what I mean? Because we're so used to seeing the word church. It's God's gathered people, the assembly of those who belong to Jesus. This is the primary understanding. God's gathered people, the assembly of those who belong to Jesus. So let's bring this home now. Assembly implies participation. When you're only part of a gathering when you gather. I know that's what I think about that. Yeah, mic drop moment, right? If the church is an assembly, then gathering is not an optional add-on to the Christian life. Gathering is just it's a part of what church just is. We live in this day and age and a culture where we often think that our identity is reduced to what we think. It's all up here. What we feel or what we claim about ourselves. But assemblies are not ideas. Assemblies are people who actually assemble. So let me provide an illustration here. Let's say someone says to you, I'm a Boy Scout, and I've been a Boy Scout for 10 years. And you say, oh, that's cool. Which troop? Oh, I don't really attend the meetings. Oh, well, have you ever gone camping? There's some great camping spots around here. No. What about badges? Let me see some of those badges. I don't have any badges. Well, do you hang out with any other scouts? No. At some point, you're probably thinking, in what meaningful sense are you a Boy Scout? And I think that this is part of what's plagued Western Christianity. We've often reduced faith to a private belief without participation in the people of God. But the New Testament does not teach us to view church merely as a weekly event that we attend. It teaches us that church, the Ekklesia, is a spiritual gathering, a family to whom we belong. Now, of course, choosing not to prioritize gatherings is very different than being unable to gather. So I just want to make that very, very clear. Early Christians understood that some people genuinely could not gather. They were sick or in prison. And you know what's amazing? There's this early account of a church service, the first account as far as what goes on. A guy named Justin Martyr records this about 150 AD. And he describes that, after the communion is served, he says that people will take the bread and the wine, and they will actually go and deliver it to the people who could not attend. Is that incredible? So the issue is not inability, it's neglect. And so listen to these words from Hebrews. This is a great verse. It says, "Let us consider how to stir up one another to love and to good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some." Even back then, that was happening. "But encourage one another, all the more as you see the day drawing near." That's talking about the return of Christ. So our devotion to God becomes visible in our devotion to one another. This includes what we spoke about when we're reading and studying the Shema, our devotion to our family, but also our spiritual family. And that starts by simply showing up. So one of the ways that you know that you found a healthy church is that people notice when you're not there. You know, that's the whole point is what Hebrews says here. You're showing up, you're encouraging one another, you're bearing one another's burdens, you're spurring one another on, motivating one another towards living this life. Love and good works. And so if you show up each week and it doesn't really matter if you're there or not, nobody knows your name, well, something's wrong. Because belonging is more than being present. Okay, so what I was sharing in the beginning with the random guy at the restaurant, right? We're sitting at the same table, but being present is not the same thing as belonging. He was physically present, but he belonged to a different gathering altogether. In the same way, the church it's more than just occupying a seat when we gather. What about this question here? Perhaps you're sitting here today and you're thinking, I don't know if I feel part of the family. Has anybody felt like this before? I know I have. What if I don't feel part of a family? Well, a gathering must be conducive to being known. It is possible to be surrounded by people and still feel that sense of loneliness. We see this on social media all the time, where people have, hundreds of friends, but not many real friends. And I think that this is one of the challenges with larger churches, is that there's a lot of lonely people, even though they're attending. But I want to say this, is that I believe that belonging often takes time. So I'm reminded of when my son Liam, or kids, when they joined a sports team like AYSO and they're playing soccer, it usually takes many practices and games before that team begins to feel that sense of unity and cohesion, right? So families are not formed overnight. Relationships, they require time and investment. And it gets messy sometimes. Whenever you're dealing with people, it gets messy. So let me ask you, have you moved beyond simply attending? Have you taken steps to introduce yourself to others? Are you making an effort to serve? There's a lot of people here that serve just to keep this gathering going, whether it be setting up communion, the praise music, greeting, etc. When was the last time you shared a meal with other believers? So have you taken any first steps, any sort of investment into being known? Because you can't just expect everybody to do that for you. And so a healthy church isn't just a place where everyone knows the pastor. I know that's important, but it's a place where people know each other. I'm reminded of the Cheers theme song. Anybody want to sing that? Everybody knows your name. A place where your absence is noticed, okay? Your struggles are shared, your burdens are carried, your gifts are needed. You can actually contribute. And it doesn't have to be a perfect service, because then we just become spectators. We have professionals doing everything for us. I love this. Jesus once told his disciples that anyone who leaves behind houses, and he says, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, or children for his sake, would receive, he says, 100-fold in this present age and the age to come. We often skip that part. He says, in this age and the age to come. How is that possible? By becoming a believer, I'm going to have hundreds more brothers, sisters, mothers, and fathers. Because when one comes to Christ, they join a spiritual family of God. Not a perfect family. Trust me, it's not a perfect family, but a real family. One of the greatest gifts that God has given us is that he never intended us to walk this journey alone. The church is not a building, it's a family, it's a body, and it is an assembly.